Welcome back to this last in our current series on bite-sized corrosion. During this winter series, we've been looking at corrosion perspectives, and we hope that in our conversation today, you will find that we have been engaging and interesting and informative, and that you've learned something about a corrosion aspect which you didn't already know. Now, during this three-part series, we've taken a look at some different corrosion perspectives. During our first week, Neil Webb, based here in South Africa, shared some interesting perspectives on the differences and the similarities of corrosion and corrosion prevention here in South Africa compared with, for example, Europe or the US. His timely reminder that iron is iron helps us to keep our perspective on the fact that corrosion is corrosion, although how we deal with it might change depending on the environment, the climate, and of course other factors. Last week, we were really privileged to spend some time with Ken Lax, who's based in the United Kingdom, and he shared some fascinating insights into the complexities of stray current interference associated with the British Underground. And today, I'm extremely honored to be talking with Dr. Markus Büchler, who is the CEO of the Swiss Society of Corrosion Prevention. The research and thinking which Markus is involved with is incredible, and yet he has an amazing ability to make corrosion interesting and understandable, even for those of us without all of the formal academic training. So Markus, a very, very warm welcome to you.
You're so welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Markus, your CV is illustrious, and I really appreciate the fact that you haven't secluded yourself into some fancy laboratory where you're just doing research. You're so passionate, I know, but I appreciate that you spend a lot of time helping the community. You develop ISO standards, you're obviously involved in field work, and you do a lot of training of up-and-coming corrosion engineers. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing. And I know when I asked you about your perspectives of corrosion, your response was immediate, and I thought very interesting because your immediate response was galvanic corrosion. Would you elaborate why that's your go-to when you think of corrosion?
Of course. I'm doing field investigation and actually actual damage case analysis for the past 23 years now. And looking back over these, I can even say decades, it's really striking that those cases where we have different types of damages, of course. There's on the one hand, the 120-year-old water pipeline, which leaks at some point, which is not a surprise. On the other hand, you have those people calling me up saying the stainless steel pipe disappears within 5 days and keeps disappearing in 5 days. That's usually a severe or even more severe stray current issue, which Ken Lax has addressed.
Correct.
But then we have a number of damages which are on a, let's put it this way, on an intermediate time scale. So they come up leakages in water pipes, valves being perforated, or pipes being leaking within, let's say, 5 years up to 20 years. So it's still within a reasonable time frame where the installation should function reliably, and still we get damages. And what we learned over these years is that typically in most of these cases, let's put it, to give a number, in 90% of these cases, damage within 5 to 30 or 40 years, we are confronted with galvanic corrosion issues. So it's really, in my professional experience, is one of the main damage causes on the one hand, and on the other hand, it would be so simple to prevent it if one would only understand in the design phase what is associated with these problems and what are the simple tricks to get them resolved. So that's the reason for proposing this topic.
Well, I do hope that today you're going to take some time to share some of your little simple tricks with us and help us to understand it, because if that is such a high contributor, then seems to me we must open our ears and listen and get to grips with it a little more. So in your hands.
Let's give you some of the background information from Switzerland, which may be slightly specific, but I think can be considered representative for Europe, and I'm pretty sure it will also be relevant for the South African environment. When looking back at construction of water pipes and the development of electrified infrastructure, in Switzerland, very soon the idea came up to actually abuse water pipes as earth ribbons for electrical installations. This was the case pretty much about 100 years ago, when a vast cast iron pipe network was constructed, which represented an excellent earth grid. And that worked well as long as we used galvanized steel ribbons as earth electrodes. This worked well as long as we didn't have concrete foundations in larger buildings. And that definitely started becoming a problem in the 70s and 80s, where we were building parking garages, where we were building high-rise buildings with enormous reinforced concrete foundations, which were deliberately or by accident included into the equipotential bonding, and which turned out to generate galvanic issues. Now, you might at first think, where's the galvanic issue if we are connecting a steel water pipe to steel reinforcement? Because at first view, you would think that cannot be a galvanic corrosion issue. So in order to get you started, I gave you now kind of the background of what was the real driving force of a lot of damages we have here. I would like to bring you back to the actual fundamentals of the corrosion issue associated with galvanic corrosion. And my favorite example is this typically 1.5 volt battery consisting of a zinc rod and some cathode, which happens to be manganese oxide inside here. But let's focus on the two poles, the plus and the minus at the both ends. And you all know these batteries. And you also know from these batteries that you can happily power some electrical equipment with those. What you're usually less aware of is that this is not just a thing, it's actually an electrolyte, or if you want, water-filled container, which is sealed at both ends. You have very good proof of the electrolyte filling, because when you let them lie around for too long, that actually container will corrode through and they will leak and possibly damage the equipment you have them stored in. So this is like a beaker of electrolyte, or let's say water plus some salt. And you are very well aware that if you install this in a flashlight, you can switch the flashlight on, and evidently it generates an electrical current. And you can profit from that electrical current to power the flashlight. You also know from your experience that forgetting to switch off the flashlight will result in empty batteries within reasonably short time. On the other hand, you also know from your experience that if you switch off the battery, the lifetime of the battery is considerably longer than when you keep the flashlight on permanently. So let's just take a short look into the battery again. I just mentioned that there is a plus and a minus electrode, and you have a zinc rod or a zinc foil and some cathode. And zinc is a non-noble metal, and the cathode is characterized by the fact that it has a relatively positive potential, and the zinc has a relatively negative potential. That results in a volt potential difference, and you know pretty much exactly what is the potential difference in here, because it's written on the battery. It says 1.5 volts. So that's the difference between the anode and the cathode, between the zinc and the manganese oxide. So that is the driving voltage which drives the current. But that's also the driving voltage, which results in the corrosion process of the sink. So if you keep this running over time, the battery at some point will be what we call in Switzerland, we call it empty. I'm not really sure what you call it in English, but it's, okay. So it's dead. And the dead battery, if you want, is the corrosion damage. The corrosion process or the corrosion effect is while you're draining current, and the damage is when the sink is gone and all the potentially available electricity has been consumed. So in order to prevent corrosion damages, we have essentially two key issues. First, we must check, do we have potential differences? We won't get potential differences if we construct our entire infrastructure out of zinc, because then everything will be at a very negative potential, and we can interconnect the zinc happily to each other and nothing's going to happen. But on the other hand, if we have a zinc steel ribbon, which we connect to a copper the earth ribbon, and we would install them both in the ground being the electrolyte, so the ground being what is contained here in the battery, and on the other hand, connect the zinc earth ribbon with the copper earth ribbon, we have, through the equipotential bonding, for example, of our earthing system, the copper will turn into the cathode, the zinc will be the anode, and it's going to be consumed over time. And we know that this earthing system is self-destructing, which is a problem for electrical safety, because your entire design of your earth ribbon and the earthing resistance won't last for a very, very long time. So it's good practice not to combine zinc with copper, because the galvanic issue is going to destroy it. Now, the same can obviously be done if you replace copper with stainless steel. Stainless steel and copper both being excellent cathodes and both eating up the zinc steel ribbon. So that's not going to solve it. But you could come up with the idea that you use a less noble metal and use the reinforcing steel in your concrete foundation as an earth electrode, because steel is less noble than copper and it's less noble than stainless steel. So this should improve the situation. But unfortunately, that's not true, because steel in concrete is a passive material. Because it's passive, it's covered with an oxide film. So technically, there is no difference from a potential point of view between copper, stainless steel, or steel in concrete. So the bad news is that steel in concrete acts as a perfect cathode and will contribute to the corrosion of your steel in the ground. That's obviously a situation which we find in abundance and which can cause massive corrosion damages, especially when we are not talking about the earth ribbon, which in many cases people might not even realize that it's actually been corroded away. But when we're talking about a steel water pipeline, which has been exposed to galvanic corrosion. I have prepared a few slides to illustrate you what I'm trying to talk about and to give some emphasis on what the issue might be. And I'm sharing, or try to share now, one of the typical configurations we are looking at least in Switzerland, because we have a relevant number of what you see over here, which is a hydroelectric plant. So we have some pressure pipes coming up from the mountains, and we use that to run a turbine and a generator. And the generator, for electrical safety reasons, needs to be connected to the earthing infrastructure, including the reinforced steel in concrete. Now, I've tried to illustrate you here this reinforced concrete structure with the reinforcing steel that is in a passive state. and acts as a cathode. On the other hand, we have our pressure pipeline coming from the mountains, being connected to the equipotential bonding and connected to the reinforcing steel. So what we're looking at here is a steel pipeline at a negative potential. It's not quite as negative as zinc, but it's, let's put it at -700 millivolt. And the reinforcing steel in concrete is around at -200 millivolts. So it doesn't give you an excellent battery, but it still gives you a battery with 0.5 volt output voltage. And you have it in the same electrolyte, being the soil, and you have the flashlight being switched on through the equipotential bonding. And that gives you what you see here, holes with a depth of about 6 millimeters within 6 years of operation, because the current flows from the pipeline into soil to the cathode over the earth equipotential bonding and drives the corrosion process. So that's one type of damage we're looking at due to the connection of steel in soil with steel in concrete. So you learn immediately galvanic corrosion is not limited to issues between copper and zinc. You can happily build galvanic corrosion between the same type of metal, provided it has a difference in potential. To give you another example, this is a valve between steel and stainless steel tubing. Usually these valves are coated with some fusion bonded epoxy coating, which has been evidently mechanically damaged here. And having the damaged coating of steel connected to the stainless steel, again, -700 here, -200 here, gives you a battery, gives you corrosion. And what we observe is that you can happily perforate about 0.5 centimeter within 5 years of operation, simply due to the galvanic corrosion between the steel and the stainless steel in that installation. So our job as corrosion engineers would be to solve this problem. And I try to illustrate you how you can do this reasonably and effectively, or actually less reasonably. And we're looking at a battery here, and we agree that connecting a lamp to this battery, which it consists of the copper rod as a cathode and the zinc rod as the anode, the zinc will corrode away when you switch on the lamp, because it has an electron conductive lead and an electrolytic contact between the two. So the flashlight is on, and our job is now to prevent the zinc from corroding. And one of the solutions that is often taken is to coat the anode, which at first looks like an excellent idea, because your idea is to separate the metal from the electrolyte. But unfortunately, it's technically impossible to make a defect-free coating. So you actually end up with tiny holes in the coating with very high current density, still considerable current flow, and actually even faster perforation of the zinc than what we would have had in the uncoated state. So imagine you have a pipeline uncoated, you have a huge anode, corrosion rate is relevant, but pitting takes tens of years. If you coat it and only have one tiny hole in the coating, the entire current gets concentrated here, and you have holes within years. So this leads to the paradox conclusion: these pipelines perforate because we have improved the quality of corrosion protection based on a coating which hasn't been defect-free. The same obviously applies with these coatings in the valves on the inside. Old ones didn't have coating, they lasted for decades. New ones have coating, and they're often perforated within a few years due to not resolving the galvanic issue. So coating of the anode is not the good idea. There is obviously another solution to this problem, which is, let's remove the electrolyte. So if you empty the battery, if you remove the sulfuric acid from your car battery, it won't get consumed, but you will not be able to use it for anything anyway. So that's preventing corrosion. That might work for a pipeline which you install above ground, but I didn't show you the example of a water-filled pipeline, because operating a water pipeline with water, without water on the inside is not quite the exact purpose of that water pipe. So that works, but it's not a solution either. So what is effective is that you coat the cathode. So you coat the copper, you decrease the copper surface here, that decreases the corrosion rate on the zinc, and that decreases the total current consumption, and that will prevent corrosion. So in this configuration, that would mean you leave the steel bare and you coat the stainless steel. Now explain that to a customer. But I had cases where I insisted on that because it was the only way to actually prevent the issue. We have more and more the case that we have thermal insulation in the foundations, which is not exactly a coating of the cathode, but which introduces a high resistive path here, which also blocks electrical current. That kind of works until the electrical guy insists on building an earth ribbon around the building, and then you're back with the corrosion issue with the copper ribbon around the building. Then obviously there is the emergency solution that you install a sacrificial anode, which eliminates the driving voltage in your system. So you sacrifice the magnesium anode and you force current entering into the anode and into the cathode. That works if designed correctly, which is not trivial at all. But for me, this is really an emergency solution. And now what is the good solution to this is, if you want to save the lifetime of your battery, of your flashlight, you switch it off. And that's the correct way of mitigating galvanic corrosion, which means that you still keep your earth equipotential bonding, but you introduce insulation flange, or you introduce an insulation flange here. And that's going to eliminate the corrosion issue. So that's what we try to do whenever possible, as a straightforward and reasonably cost-effective means of eliminating galvanic corrosion issues.
That's very clever, and it's something that we don't necessarily in the construction industry take as seriously and as importantly as it is. Very often I know that when we've recommended the installation of insulating flanges, they are left to the very last minute. Nobody really wants to take ownership of them. They're installed badly. But I think this has really helped to see the tremendous value. And as you rightly say, it's a very simple way to solve the problem. And I think your analogy with the flashlight, turning it off, maybe will help it stick with some of the construction engineers as to, okay, that's why we want to do it. And I think that's very helpful. Thank you.
And just to give you a few numbers, in the city of Zurich, where we located, we started installing insulation joints into the public water piping at the building introduction in the mid-90s. And it was finished in the around 2005. And ever since, the number of water leaks has significantly decreased, which we obviously attribute to the introduction of these insulation joints. So there is really a documented benefit in doing this, even if you do it retrospectively, which is not too late, but it would obviously be more cost effective if you do it right away.
Yes. Well, it's encouraging to hear your statistics, because I think it's often the numbers that speak to people who make decisions or change. It helps to change the way people do things. So that was really interesting. Thank you, Markus. I think you've explained it so elegantly and so simply. I said before we went on air that I knew I would learn something, and I think you've just helped me to crystallize the thoughts again. And sometimes it's really good to go back right to the basics, to re-grasp the grassroots stuff, because when you get it right, it can make the more complicated stuff far easier to manage. So thank you very much.